Well, this is Defeating Adventism number 139. I'm getting close to Defeating Adventism number 144. And you know what? 144 has got to be on the 144,000. So stand by for that. Here we are at 139. This is going to be my second video on Seventh-day Adventist statistics as a result of, I want to say, their own statistical report and others reporting on it. I first did a video here, Defeating Adventism number 9, which you can see here, 3 years ago. Was a long time ago. It seems like I did this. In that video, I talk about the declining numbers of retention. You know, as early as 1995, Adventists were losing about 25%. 24 out of every 100, roughly 25. 25% were leaving. For every commitment they got, a quarter of them were going. So, you know, they got 4 commitments, 1 person left. But that number now, and I mean, when I did that video 3 years ago, it was 49%. Now you're going to see something, and it's much worse. Far worse than 49%. It keeps going up. It keeps getting worse. So what we're going to do is, my data in this video is largely from the 2023 report, which is 2022 data that you can see here on the screen. I did use some older reports in some cases, going back to 18 or 19, and I'll tell you when I did that and use those. But here's really what I wanted to do in this video, and I'll probably even do more in future videos, adding to what I've done here, is I wanted to go well beyond just what somebody reported that I read somewhere in the Seventh-day Adventist retention rate. I wanted to actually do my own data analysis of this religion. Now, here's how I'm going to approach this report. I'm going to approach it from a very business perspective. I'm going to look at finance, income, revenue, money coming in, dollars coming in. I want to look at that. Where's your profit centers? Where's not your profit centers? You got 13 divisions. I'm calling them profit centers. There's divisions because they're not all equal. Some contribute a whole lot more in terms of dollars, some way less. And so I want to look at these profit centers. I want to look at the human resource side. And what I mean by the human resource side is I'm looking at employees. And there are full-time, part-time, and I think they call the other one casual employees. Makes up the total employment picture. We're going to look at that. We're going to look at dollars. We're going to look at employees. We're going to look at churches. And you'll hear me say in the video, when I go on screen and do this, that churches don't know exactly what churches mean when they grow in numbers. Doesn't mean they're actually building a church, leasing a space, or none of the above because someone gifted it to them. I don't know, but here's what I do know is that when you have a new church, there are expenses that come along with that church, probably in terms of employment and other overhead expenses. So I'm looking at each of these 13 divisions as 13 profit centers. So I'm looking at the tithes of the 13 divisions as profit centers, see who your performers are and who your non-performers are. And I think you'll find that interesting. I'm going to look at the divisions and see where they're growing and where they're not growing. Or maybe they're receding. I'm going to look at employment trends by division. Who's hiring all the bodies? In other words, we've got to pay all this salary. Who's not hiring? Who is hiring? Who's growing? Who's shrinking? All these trends that I mentioned are going to be compared one against the other as I progress through my data analysis that I did on this. For example, here's something you're going to see. You're going to see the highest tithe paying per capita division is the worst growth of all divisions and has the highest number of total employees. So did you catch what I said? The highest tithe paying per capita division has the worst growth and has the most employees. So you're going to see trends and data put together like that. So full disclosure here, if there's any errors in calculation or conclusion, they're mine. I own it. On all my opinions, everything I'm saying here is based on my opinion, my conclusions, and you judge the facts. All data unless otherwise said, is going to come from the 2023 report, which is, again, 2022 data. So let's start here, looking at revenue, looking at tithes, starting here. And starting off here with tithe, I want you to notice in 2022, $3.8 billion were collected. This is huge. So by a point of comparison, here's the top 2,100 companies in the world that are all with revenue of $3.8 billion, as you can see. And look at who some of them are. Maybe you've heard of Air New Zealand. How about the fashion designer Burberry? I at least know here in the United States, we know who TransUnion is, or a credit reporting agency. Just to give you an idea, this is a big deal. Now, here's my assumption and the data that I use. I am really only interested in financial collections that come really directly from individuals. It's a really personal thing to give. I may not understand all the other categories that I didn't underline in red, but I think I understood the two that I did, and that is the tithe and the local church funds. Those look like very personal, direct contributions. Just those two buckets right there are almost 95% of all tithe dollars collected. That in itself is significant. Notice they calculated a per capita tithe, $125. Isn't it interesting that they didn't do it by division? I'm going to show you by division, and you're going to see a very stark contrast coming up here. To put it together, here's what I had to do. First thing, I went to all the detailed data by division and got the tithe amount and the local church funds they contributed. And you can see this is table number 25 in the 2023 report. Remember, the top two financial buckets, these two right here, are 94.7% of all tithes collected. So I collected those figures. Well, and then I had to go and collect membership numbers. You can see this is table 4, and you can check it out. Go ahead and get the 2023 report. So now I got membership by division to do this. So for my analysis, by the way, in this analysis, I excluded all those attached to the general conference. I just want these 13 profit centers. They call divisions. I'm going to call them profit centers. That's my focus here and now. I will tell you when I include that later. So now what have I done? I've collected the tithe by division, the local church funds they contributed, and their member count. Now I can calculate tithe per capita by profit center or by division. And first I want you to notice this. Look at this. Inter-European local church funds that they sent to the coffers, 0. And I thought, how in the world did they get away with that? Everyone else is contributing dollars except them. Let's look at this now. Here's your 13 profit centers. You know the first important statistic that caught my attention? These 3 right here. Here's your big 3. These 3 alone are almost 80% of all dollars collected. Just 3. Let's go on the other end of the spectrum. These 5, who I call the bottom 5, only account for 9% of all dollars collected. I want you to remember this. Adventism works in a bureaucratic type model. In a bureaucratic model, there are internal power struggles over dollars, over resources, over heads, humans, employee numbers that you're going to see. That's just the way it works. I see internal strife here. You got your big givers, you got your small givers. I would not be surprised if there is some source of conflict between these two. The way that this group may look upon this group and the way that this group is going to look upon them, and you're going to see why too for other reasons. Because, well, in a bureaucratic system, one of the sources of power is financial. Here's your financial powerhouse right here. These 3, almost 80% of all dollars collected. So I can see some struggles. Let's do a quick summary here. I could say it like this. 23%, almost a quarter of the divisions, bring in 80% of the dollars. 40% of the divisions bring in 9%. They're underperforming in terms of dollars when we look across division. You can look at these wildly different per capita rates, from a high of $1,471 to a low of $10 per capita. Vast discrepancies here, and this will be important later, as you'll see here in a minute. But there's something else I wanted to do, and that was this. I wanted to show a comparison of the trends for tithing and membership count. Now, membership count shows a pretty steady increase over time. But look at the tithe. It's kind of erratic. Now, even if we take out this data point here, which is the COVID, we move it up and what we call, in air quotes, normalize the data. And I would put it even here where I have the mouse pointer. It's still pretty erratic. It doesn't quite follow the increasing trend line of membership, this is telling me that collecting the tithe is hard, it's difficult, it's not consistent, and it's definitely not consistent in the trend with member rates. So I see collecting the tithe as a problem. Let's move on. Now we know the income. Now we know where the income's coming from, where it's not coming from. Let's look at new professions of faith. And what do we have here? So here's table 3, ascensions, professions of faith, baptism. And what this shows here is the top 3, 66% of all new professions, or we can say even formers, etc., are coming from just these 3. Right here, 66% are from these 3. East Central Africa, South American, and South African Indian Ocean. But, as you just saw, 2 of these 3 are in the bottom 5 in terms of where the tithes come from. So where we have professions of faith, we don't have dollars coming in. That's a negative budget picture, by the way, in my mind when I look at that. So anyway, what do we have? We have these top 3, 66%. Let's do the same thing we did on the other one. What about the bottom percentage? Here's your bottom 7 here in terms of total professions of faith. And by the way, the 3 highest tithe per capita are in the bottom of this total for professions of faith. This doesn't bode well. This is the cash engine. This is the 80% of the cash coming into the Adventist coffers, and they're in the bottom 7 of ascensions. This is the bottom end of receiving the cash, but they're in the growth for ascension. Now, keep in mind, I want you to remember, ascensions are not growth. Growth is what you keep after they make the profession of faith, which is where we're going to go next. But before we go there, I want you to think about it like this. Like, here's just something to think about, a budget picture. Your top per capita is North America, $1,400 per person. But they are the 7th best in getting a profession of faith. Now, your top for getting a profession of faith, that's East Central Africa. They are the bottom of the list. They're number 12 of 13 in tithe per capita. We could say it like this. To keep the budget the same, if you lose a North American tither, you got to get 98 from East Central Africa just to make up the difference. Huge differences here, which have budget impacts that I think we're going to see in this church in the coming years. So, remember what I said. Professions of faith are not growth. Growth is, professions minus the losses, like you see here. When you look at this table, what do you think is counted as a loss? Is there any category not counted as a loss? I'm just telling you, this was a big surprise for me. I wanted to examine the detailed data. I asked myself, can I reconcile? Can I go look at the detailed data, 50, 100 pages beneath this table? Can I find the losses? Can I add it up? Can I equal 106,463 by looking at the detailed data? So, okay, let me back into this number to see what they're counting as a loss. Because when you go to the detailed data, there are 5 categories here for members subtracted. And each of them are totaled on the bottom, and there's the totals. So recall, I wanted to say, how can I get from all these numbers to 106,463? And you know what I found out? You can, and you have to add dropped, missing, and adjustments. Don't count deaths, don't count letters granted. Did you hear what I said? Losses do not include deaths. There's your losses, dropped, missing, and adjustments, whatever that means. I don't know, but that's it. And I did this, and I was able to reconcile the loss figures here to the detailed data here, and that's what I get. So see, there's 2 categories they don't count. They don't count deaths, and they don't count letters granted, which I thought was interesting. You can even die in Seventh-day Adventism, and they're not going to count you in the losses. I thought, absolutely amazing. You can't even be removed in death. Some of you former Adventists, I know, are trying to be removed while you're alive, and they won't do it. And apparently if you die, they're not going to show that either. But as I was looking at these members subtracted, I noticed that letters granted had an offsetting entry over here of letters received. Now, what I think I've learned from this is letters granted are letters members submit so that they can say, I'm going to transfer from this division to that division. So letters granted. Okay, permission granted. You can go to East, you can go to European division. Okay, letters granted, letters received. You would think they would be kind of the same, right? That they would be somewhat equal. It's because they're offsetting entries. You can look at this one division here, and they granted 207,000 letters, but they received 203. So I would think that these numbers, if totaled up, would be kind of close. Well, here's what I found. The numbers don't reconcile. There were far more letters granted, 442,000, than letters received. In other words, 4,600 members got a letter that they were going to move to another division, and no one got that letter. Sounds like to me they just disappeared. Now, here's what I will admit. This is only 1% of the total, this missing number here. So on one hand, I could say, maybe not a real significant number. But still, that's 4,600 members that just kind of slipped away. And this is only the first year I've done this. And if this happens year after year after year, maybe this goes from a fairly not significant number to just a very slow bleeding of members. It's a very easy way to leave the Seventh-day Adventist Church, don't you think? Let me just get a letter granted for my departure and then just never go anywhere. And I can kind of leave the organization and in a very easy, non-confrontational way. So anyway, just interesting point. So let's go here to this. So you're going to see, you already saw table 5 where they showed losses. And then you already saw the table where they show professions of faith. Let's look at now, what is the true departure rate? There it is, 71%. Now remember, this number doesn't include deaths. So 71% of everybody who's alive makes the decision that once they make a profession of faith, 71% say, never mind, and they leave. This is big. Because remember, last time I did this in the former Defeating Adventism, that number was 49%. In 2019. Now it's 71%. This is a hugely increasing trend. But I thought when I was doing this, I go, why don't you include deaths? Those are losses. Calculate it. That has an impact. So I did it for them. So here I added the deaths in, and the real loss rate, when you factor in deaths, is 76% churn rate. So what I also did was I say, well, who's the best and who's the worst here? Let's look at the worst. Who's the worst at retention? North America. Look at that. Worst at retention, highest in per capita, in tithe. That combination right there is a budget disaster in the future. Period. Can't have your highest tithe payer with the worst retention rate. Financial problems ahead. The second worst retention number, that's the Euro-Asia. But actually, that's really not a retention issue. That number was reduced because they lost Ukraine. And they took the Ukrainian Union out and they put it into the GC as an attachment, so that's why that number is big. But the third one, the South African Indian Ocean, I thought was interesting. Being the third worst, they are the third highest in getting professions of faith, and they're the third worst for keeping them. So they can't even keep them. They get a whole bunch of them, they run in, and they run out the back door almost as fast. Remember the top 3, like I said, tithe per capita. And look at these rates here. When we add in deaths, how are they doing? They're doing horrible. North America, 225% are leaving North America. You are losing them faster than you're gaining them in North America, which is, again, I'm going to see this over and over, highest tithe per capita. How about the second highest tithe per capita? Well, that's inter-European. They're almost at 100%. They're almost, for every one new member they get, one member's leaving. And the third highest tithe per capita, trans-European, is not far behind inter-European. And both of these, if these trends continue, both of these are going to be at 100%. In other words, you will be bleeding members in your cash engine right here of these top 3 right there. So this data tells me your worst retention rates are amongst your highest tithe per capita. And by the way, let's look at the best. Here's the best, 18%. They are doing the best at keeping professions of faith. They're nothing like North America. They're doing pretty good, but they're in the bottom 5 of the tithe per capita. So where they're doing the best is not where the dollars are coming from. Where they're doing the worst in retention is where all the dollars are coming from. That means there's a budget crisis in the future here for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. If this doesn't change, now it could change, but if it doesn't, there's a budget crisis. This cash cow won't be delivering the cash that they need anymore. They'll be gaining members in the bottom 5 here and losing in the top 3. I see a budget crisis in the future. Now there's something else I wanted to do, and I looked at this chart right here. I wanted to see losses and professions of faith because that gap has been increasing. So I plopped it into a chart here. Look at the data. Look at the gap between these two data points, and look at the trend of these two lines. They are diverging. They are getting bigger. That's because more members. Doesn't matter how many professions of faith they get, more and more are leaving. And if this gap here continues to spread, everything we're talking about here is just absolutely going to get worse. So we'll see if it does or not. Of course, we got this really data anomaly here from 2020 at the COVID. But if we start looking into the future beyond that to the right, this is not looking good. Recall from Defeating Adventism number 9, where I said, remember the retention rate was 49%? Now we got 70-something%. So this is not looking good at all. Now we're going to move to the next element here. Head count, people count, full-time employment, part-time employment. They give us this data here. We got full-time employment, part-time employment. They add it all up. We could look at total employment. We can see who's increasing. So this all comes from table 18, and they do it by division, and they tell us they give you part-time numbers, full-time numbers, and we turn the page here and it continues. There's your 13 profit centers right there. You can see total active employees, full-time, part-time, casual employment, total employment. There it is. That's what I'm interested in. But as I was putting this together, I looked at the column to the right because I saw some big numbers and I saw some small numbers, and it's literature evangelists, and I went, what's going on here? Look at the 47, look at the 15. Look at the 47. Literature evangelist 47. You can look at that list and go, yeah, they're just the second one from the bottom. You know who that is? That's North America. That's your number one tither. They're absolutely not interested in doing any literature evangelism. And they're not growing. Right? Because they're losing members too, right, by the way? And look at number 15 there. That's trans-European. They're in the top 3 of the tithers too. And they're bottom of the list for literature evangelists. Not interested in doing any evangelism there, are you? Kind of just sitting around. While the other ones, there's the 7,800. That's your East Central African. Bottom of the list for tithe paying, top of the list for in terms of ascensions and even retention. They're doing better. So anyway, back to employment. Here we are. Now for this chart, I did go back and use previous reports. I went back to 2019. You're going to see employment over a 5-year period. I want you to know that when you see the percent change, it's percent change of 2023 and 2022 that you see here. So when I look at all these numbers, what does this tell me? Well, you know what it tells me here? We got 4 divisions that make up 80% of total employment. 4 divisions. That's huge. Of these 4 divisions, right, North America, the North American division alone has 48% of the total world employment. That's huge. The North American division, right? So I just know these other 12 divisions kind of feel dominated by this, declining division. They got financial power. They're the highest tithe per capita, but they aren't growing. Matter of fact, you saw in the previous chart, they are bleeding members. It's getting worse. But these 12 divisions are dominated by them. Look at their employment numbers and the influence that they have by virtue of having darn near half of the employment numbers concentrated in one division who's not doing well, who doesn't care about literature evangelism either. So in a bureaucratic organization, there are internal struggles for power. Power of people, power of dollars, power of resources, power of influence and persuasion. And you get all that in a bureaucratic system by having numbers. And North America's got the numbers. Right now they're number 1 for tithe contribution, and boy are they number 1 in terms of full-time employment, which gives them the power to make, and I'm sure that employment includes policy decisions and other future directions of the enterprise. Now, like I said, when professions of faith are compared against loss, we see the real growth rate. We see the real retention rate. So looking at this chart, the top two in retaining members were two of them that actually decreased employees. So I thought, isn't that interesting? You're the best two at retaining new members that you get, and you are rewarded by decreased employment. Cue the applause. Now, you will see this here too. This is by far the worst employment drop, but it's really not a reflection of employment drop. What happened is they pulled the Ukrainian division out here and attached it to the General Conference. That's why that number is so big. It doesn't really reflect a true loss. Now, 9 divisions had an increase in total active employment. 4 divisions had a net increase. And here are those 4 divisions. As I said earlier, 2 of those divisions, 2 of those 4, were the best at retention and got rewarded by decreasing employment. But 3 of these 4 here are also in the bottom list, the bottom 5 in your ties per capita. So let's just look at this in an overall sense. Employment grew 7.1% in this report. Ties grew 4.8%. Right now, to me, it looks like they can probably fund this employment growth, but ties, as you saw, the trend, it's sketchy, it's not consistent. I think if you keep losing members in your top 3, we're going to have to see some declines here coming. Well, now we are going to move to infrastructure. By infrastructure, I mean churches. Here's what I know and here's what I don't know about the church is from this report. I can see increases and decreases in churches by division. What I don't know is, are those building projects? Are they leasing buildings? Or maybe churches were just gifted to them and they grow a church. So I can't make a direct comparison to the cash outlay for each new church that's grown. But what I can do is make an assumption that by growing churches, they're growing employment and they're also growing expenses. So let's just look at this one division by example. We can look at it by union, and they add up all the unions, and this one division is 15,816 churches. I gathered all that data, I put it in this here, and again, for this, I went back to 2019. So I went to some older reports. I want to say this, that it's a benefit to local churches here to do a couple things, and that is, don't recognize when you have members missing. I know many of you former Adventists, because I hear you complain all the time, and rightly so. You write the church, take me off your rolls, and they don't. Because it's a benefit to those pastors to keep those numbers high. To keep the numbers high keeps the church in existence, keeps the pastor on the payroll, etc., etc., etc. You see how this goes. So on one hand, if you were to ask me, do I believe in these membership counts and these church counts are accurate? I say, no, I don't. Because I hear far too many stories of members trying to get their name off the roll, and they can't. And I've heard far too many stories of people telling me of churches, and you'll know who I'm talking to here, somebody I talked to recently said, oh yeah, there's a church with 600 people that they report, but when they actually go to the church, there might be 100 or 125 in attendance. Yeah, 600 to 100 plus. Big difference there, right? It's not to their advantage to do that. They get the clout. They get the organizational power in the bureaucracy. I've got 600 members in my church. I'm a full-time pastor. Maybe I can have a part-time pastor or 2 because we got 600 members after all. When it's really like 100. I know I don't believe the numbers. I think they're fake. But we're going to go with what we got. And here's what they're reporting. We're going to report what they got. So let's look at it. We have 4 divisions here. Just 4 that make up 66% of all the churches. So there's your disproportionate there. Now, of these 4 that make up the 66%, South American and the Inter-American, I have 2 of the largest employee accounts, which you would expect. A lot of churches, a lot of heads on staff, and 2 of the 4 do, and we would kind of expect that. Let's look at our highest tithe per capita churches. They are 10% of the total. They're a small amount of the churches when we look at the total. Again, that's another problem I see coming for the SDA church. Now, let's look at the one with The highest church count. There it is, East Central Africa. And what do I know about East Central Africa? They are ranked number 12 of 13 in per capita tithe. They're just one from the bottom of the list. South Asia here, the bottom of the list. Second, East Central Africa. But they have the largest amount of churches. Let's look at the one with the smallest here. Here's what I think I remember about this one. Went from 2,100 to 800, right? Big drop. And that's because, if my memory serves me correct, that was the Chinese Union pulled out of this division and then given to the General Conference. So that explains that drop. But you can look consistently, they're 800. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, why does this division even exist? Why are you paying division presidents, building costs, etc., for something that's only 860? To me, this here is ripe for a cost-saving measure. Collapse this division, merge it with another one, save all those personnel and building expenses, which is something I think they're going to have to do later. But to me, this division doesn't have a need to exist. They're sucking probably more dollars than they are bringing in. That would be my organizational assessment of this. So anyway, looking at the highest tithe per capita church here in North America, they're the 9th best in church growth. 9th. That doesn't bode well. You want your highest per capita to be one of your top in church growth, but it ain't happening. How about your second highest in capita? That's your inter-European. They're negative church growth. That's another really, really bad sign. Well, I hope you enjoyed looking at the 2023 report and the other ones that I mentioned in this. My big takeaway is this. North America and Europe are the cash engines driving this entire Seventh-day Adventist structure, but they're dying slowly. They're the worst in growth. They're the worst in literature evangelism. They aren't making it, but there's the cash engine. The cash engine is running out of gas, Seventh-day Adventist. This business, if this keeps up, it may or may not. If it does, the Seventh-day Adventist bureaucratic structure is going to be forced to make some trade-offs here. And you're going to have to be forced to be cutting, laying off, etc. This negative retention rate has been going on now for in excess, easily, probably more, I'll just say 10, but more than 10. Keep losing them faster than they're getting them. While the numbers are still positive in terms of membership numbers, which you heard me already say, I don't believe the membership numbers because they are inflated, because they are severely over-reported. But you can't keep this downward trend of losing all these members. Losing 71% of your new commitments, this is a growth disaster coming downstream for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, in terms of its bureaucratic nature, North America has the tithe or financial power in this bureaucratic arrangement, but it's not growing. It has the worst retention levels, but they have 48% of all employees are in that one division, which was astounding. And they're near the bottom of the list, second from the bottom to be exact, in terms of literature evangelists. They aren't doing anything to grow this thing. They're riding on fumes from Ellen White's day. Period. Other divisions, again, I predict this having observed and worked in bureaucratic organizations where there are constant struggles and internal for power and influence, and Seventh-day Adventist Church is just a bureaucratic organization. Some of these divisions, profit centers, are going to look at North America and say, what are you guys doing? You aren't even out there contributing to the cause. You're losing members faster than you're getting them. You have half of all the employees, which you don't deserve because you're losing them. Yes, you have the highest tithe per capita now, but given your current trends, that too will probably change. I could just see there's going to be internal strife and probably power struggles. There probably is, and I probably don't even know what's going on. Now, and you saw this in the video, divisions with the best retention, they were rewarded by getting less employment. That's just going to create internal strife. This whole scheme that we see here, this is not a sustainable path for growth. Again, don't believe the membership numbers, but even if they are believable, we're seeing those numbers are slowly, and they're going to grind to a halt. If the Adventist was ever honest, and they were actually, if all the churches and all the 13 profit centers were reporting the actual membership count, there would be millions less than what we see now. Now let me tell you this. I've been on this path with the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I've already seen this movie. I know how it's going to play out. Adventists are probably 2 decades or so behind where the Jehovah's Witnesses are. So what we're going to see here with Adventism is this is my prediction. It's not going to be fast, and it's not going to be overnight. But if, and I say again, if these trends continue, then we're going to see budget cuts, closures, consolidations, all manner of cost-saving measures are going to be employed. Now, here is a recent article on this very topic right here. And you can look at this, February 2024. This is March of 2024. Here we are, Oregon Conference, budget cuts. Because I've been on this path with Jehovah's Witnesses, the Jehovah's Witnesses became really sensitive to their own data, because Jehovah's Witnesses publish data too, just like the Seventh-day Adventists. And we started publishing this data and looking at the statistics in not exactly the way Jehovah's Witnesses wanted us to, and the Jehovah's Happy Organization wasn't so happy. So you know what Jehovah's Happy Organization did was, when they started doing consolidations and closures and cuts, they were quiet. They were censoring. That wasn't news anymore. And I expect the Seventh-day Adventist Church is going to do the same. Now that they know that me and others are reporting on their data and looking at their growth, they're not going to be reporting stories like we saw. They will be censored. So here's what I learned from the growth numbers. Performance resides largely in Asia and Africa. That's it. It's North America and Europe that provide the economic power really to fuel everything else. Remember that statistic that I showed you? That one North American tither at $1,471 is lost. It takes 98 from East Central Africa to equate that one tither that you lose in North America. That's not a sustainable course. Now, Adventists, you guys love in your literature to talk about beast and etc. You know, it's just a kind of proclivity of Adventists. They like to talk about beasts in the literature. So I'm going to use that same vernacular with you guys, Seventh-day Adventists. And as I was doing this, I'm thinking, because at one point I was thinking, I should really focus my efforts on Africa, because that's where they're growing the most, Africa and parts of Asia. And then after looking at the data, I said, nah. The beast that's funding this beast, it's North America and Europe. For every one North American tithe loss, you got to get 98 from East Central Africa. So I think it's my mission to continue to bleed this beast called Seventh-day Adventism, and keep this outreach alive and going to North America, because every one of those you lose, you're losing your economic power to fuel Adventism around the world. So I'm going to continue bleeding the beast that's North American and European Adventism.